On March 4th, 2026, a United States Navy submarine sank the Iranian frigate IRIS Dena in the Indian Ocean off the coast of Sri Lanka in international waters. Since then, the sinking has become incredibly controversial, at least among a certain segment of the political spectrum that believes it constitutes a war crime of some sort. In this video, I will go over the most common claims and assess their validity. I will be referring to several primary documents such as the Second Geneva Convention, and they will be linked in the description. As a disclaimer, I am by no means a legal expert in international law and simply interpreting international agreements as written, and these are just my opinions. The first claim that I will examine is that the Dena was sunk during an illegal war. The truth here is a bit more complicated than that. In the United States, Congress has the power to declare war. They have not officially declared war on Iran. Regardless, the United States has not officially declared war on any nation since World War II, yet it has waged numerous wars since they all had at least some form of congressional approval. There is also an argument that the war potentially violates the UN Charter. Though there has been no official condemnation by the UN body, there has been condemnation from world leaders and UN leaders. While the war itself is legally and politically ambiguous, hostilities persist nonetheless. According to Article 2 of the Second Geneva Convention, the stipulations of the convention, quote, apply to all cases of declared war or if any other armed conflict which may arise between two or more of the high contracting parties, even if the state of war is not recognized by one of them, end quote. Therefore, regardless of whether the war is legally allowed or not by the legal means of the United States or Iran, it's irrelevant since an armed conflict is ongoing regardless. That means all the rules of war still apply regardless of the political and legal circumstances regarding the conflict. The second claim I want to examine is that the IRIS Dena was unarmed. This has been claimed in several places, but the truth is there is no evidence to support the statement that Dena was unarmed. This claim centers on Dena's participation in the 2026 International Fleet Review in India and the 2026 Milan naval exercise that took part as well. There is evidence of live fire exercises during that exercise. Regardless, the question of whether Dena had ammunition for their weapons is completely irrelevant. According to the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, a warship is defined as, quote, a ship belonging to the armed forces of a state bearing the external marks distinguishing such ships of its nationality under the command of an officer duly commissioned by the government of the state and whose name appears in the appropriate service list or its equivalent, and manned by a crew which is under regular armed forces discipline, end quote. There is no requirement that the ship be armed to qualify as a warship under UNCLOS if it belongs to the armed forces of a state, in this case, the Iranian Navy. If that alone doesn't convince you, keep in mind that the US submarine that sank the Dena had no way of knowing whether it was carrying any ammunition for its weapons, and therefore had to assume it remained a threat. Just to cap off this section, I also want to point out that a second Iranian ship was in the area. The 3,200-ton IRIS Bandar Abbas accompanied the Dena to India and operates as a fleet supply ship. In theory, Bandar Abbas could have refueled and rearmed Dena for it to conduct further operations. After the Dena was sunk, the Bandar Abbas surrendered to Sri Lankan authorities for the remainder of the hostilities, something the Dena itself could have done to spare itself from destruction. The last claim I want to look at is whether the US committed a war crime by not rescuing the survivors of the sinking. The truth here is a bit complicated. According to Article 18 of the Second Geneva Convention, quote, after each engagement, parties to the conflict shall, without delay, take all possible measures to search for and collect the shipwrecked, wounded, and sick." End quote. The U.S. submarine responsible did not surface to rescue survivors. This practice has been typical of submarines since World War II. In fact, German Admiral Karl Dönitz was accused of war crimes for his infamous Laconia Order. That order prohibited German U-boats from rescuing survivors of the ships they sank. The reasoning behind this was the Laconia incident, where German U-boats were attacked by Allied aircraft even though they were conducting a rescue operation, were flying Red Cross flags, and had even informed the Allies that they were conducting the rescue operation. U.S. Admiral Chester Nimitz came to Dönitz's defense by stating that U.S. submarines had also conducted unrestricted submarine warfare, which included not rescuing survivors if it endangered the submarine. Ultimately, Dönitz was not found guilty of a war crime. This precedent can also apply to the sinking of the Dena, as the U.S. submarine responsible would potentially be putting itself in danger by surfacing. In addition, the sub would not necessarily have the space or medical facilities to properly care for the wounded survivors, not to mention the inherent danger of taking on board enemy sailors in such a confined space without being able to properly secure them. There has been some reporting that indicates that the submarine did alert Sri Lankan authorities to the sinking, and Sri Lanka ultimately rescued 32 survivors. To briefly summarize, the sinking of IRIS Dena was conducted during a period of open conflict between the United States and Iran. The Dena was a valid military target, and while the U.S. submarine responsible for sinking her did not attempt to rescue the crew, there is legal precedent for a submarine not doing so, as well as possible evidence that they alerted Sri Lankan authorities to the sinking. Overall, the attack was legal and within the norms of naval warfare. I hope you find this video interesting, and I will see you on the next one.